Hey, it's Matt from the podcastsetup.com. Today I want to talk about creating images with AI for podcasts and especially cover art images. So I've been consulting with a lot of local clients lately. Well, a handful of local clients who are now taking interest into finally creating that podcast for their local initiative. And a lot of folks, as I talk to them about cover art and the value of great cover art, unique cover art, and more importantly, the value of scalable cover art, and I'm going to explain that in a second. I've seen a lot of them just default to, hey, I just want to use AI. Like, can I just use AI to make cover art for my podcast? So we're going to experiment with that today using ChatGPT and Claude, and we're going to go through some of the pros and cons of this, and I'll try to explain that. But what I really want you to take away from this, especially if you're somebody who is using AI to help create any kind of marketing asset, whether it is your podcast cover art or chapter art or promotional art, there's something about scaling this work that we're doing with AI, which on the design side gets a little bit harder, right? With copywriting, coding, web design, you can scale it because you can create more of it. And if you need to change something, you say, hey, do this again, either rewrite it or recode it or redevelop it, right? But with design and art, it's a little bit trickier to just constantly reproduce something, because what that's doing is changing the look and feel potentially of your brand, of your podcast, of your company, like whatever your podcast fits in your branding scheme. So there are some things you can do with ChatGPT, like connect it up to Canva, and I'm going to take a look at that real briefly today. But I just want you to know that when you're creating these images, it's almost like a one-of-one. ChatGPT is getting much better at creating consistent work, but the problem is when you need to replicate that somewhere else, that's the downfall. Or if you need to, have an exact pixel perfect match of your logo because it's trademarked, it's what you use, it's your logo. Very difficult to always get that correct. Or at least you're on the cautious side of having to lose detail in that if you're using AI. So that's something that I think a lot of folks don't really think of when they're using AI assisted technologies. And everyone's looking the same these days. I don't know about you. I don't know how, but I started spending more time on Facebook recently, which is not a good thing, but it's because I've been helping out in the local area a lot more. And I've noticed a lot of small businesses using ChatGPT to create graphics and art, and they all look the same. It is the same thing over and over again. Yes, different colors, sure, different generated images, but an AI-assisted ChatGPT poster when you see one on Facebook. I'm sure you might know if you pay attention to this stuff. So you run the risk of that too when you're doing this in podcasts, and certainly with the show a microphone thing. Let's dive into ChatGPT. I'm going to just use a blank prompt here, and I'm just going to go at this at what I call the cheapest prompt possible, which is create me a podcast cover art image for my podcast, which is about podcasting. So I thought about using the name that I want to use for my podcast about podcasting, but I'm not going to do that yet because I don't want somebody to go and steal it. So I wrote podcast. Let me just fix that spelling. And that's it. I'm not going to give it any direction. I'm not going to say what size to use. I'm just going to go and see what ChatGPT gives me, because I think for most people who might be jumping into podcasting and AI, that might be all that they're doing. I don't know. Just give me a podcast cover art. How hard could it be? Let's go ahead and hit enter and see where this goes. I don't know. Sometimes I do a lot of screencasts with software, just educating folks around software as well. And sometimes it takes forever. If it does take forever, I'm just going to skip and come back to this point right here. Okay, so we can see fault number one, that it is literally just showing us a podcast microphone headset, and I didn't give it a title. It didn't ask me for a title. It didn't prompt me for a title. We're going to look at the Claude design system in a little bit, but this is the sort of first pitfall of at least working with ChatGPT in images for the most part. It's just going to give you whatever you ask for. It doesn't do a great job at building context for what like the true goal is. So again, if you're going to go into this, know that you need to think clearly, you need to think logically, and how the whole brand wraps into your podcast cover art, including a podcast title. So let's say I am just the average user. I might say, oh, we didn't put a title in here. Now let's add the title. So let's add the title, Another Podcast. That will be the title of my show. And let's see how well it does with adding text. And then we will look at how either effective or ineffective that is as soon as it generates it. Okay, it has finished adding text using the same color scheme, of course, but it just says Another Podcast. It's the same graphics as it originally illustrated for us, and now Another Podcast. And this is where things break down, because we're not able to replicate this. We're not able to pull out this text and modify it on some kind of like canvas like you would a traditional editor. But you probably know that because that's why you're in ChatGPT. You want something quick and dirty. But this is one of the pitfalls here is we're forgetting like, hey, I can't change this text later. So if this text is off by a little bit of pixels, or I want to bump it up a little bit and actually put it in front of the microphone, I'm having to do this all within ChatGPT. And there's a, what's the word? Degeneration? Is that the word? Where it degrades. The image degrades. The more and more we're putting this image into ChatGPT and asking it to do things, the more it's degrading and potentially modifying the image. So let's just take a look at that as an example. We asked for it to add the text Another Podcast. That's my title. But you can see if we look at the two microphones, these are two different microphones. They are visually the same, but the graphic itself, this is a shorter microphone. What it did is it compressed it and compacted it a little bit, and then it actually moved it down the frame of the image, where you can see on the original one that it created us, there's, I don't know, about an inch there of room between, the perspective of the camera view to the desk and to the microphone. And then here in the new graphic, it is a lot different. Even the sort of surface area of that desk that it's on. These are all minor details for most people, but just know that we're creating these modifications every time we're asking it to do something. And especially if you're using human photos and you're asking it to incorporate, let's say, your headshot into a cover art. I've often found that when you begin to continue to ask it to move things around, it's constantly redrawing that original photo, and you're always at odds with that degradation of quality. Okay, let's just do one more thing here just to make my point a little bit clearer. Let's say we want to add a Apple Podcast logo, right? So let's say add a Apple, actually let's say add a Listen on Apple Podcasts badge somewhere on the cover art. And let's just see how it does with this request. Okay, so we that request actually did a fairly good job visually on representing the Listen on Apple Podcasts. It looks pretty accurate to Apple's guidelines. The problem is, we're not often putting a Listen to Apple Podcasts or any of the badges on cover art. But if you did, you always have to check the guidelines from the brands themselves, right? So Spotify, Apple, YouTube, they certainly have brand guidelines for using their logos and their artworks for the call to actions like looking and listening on Apple Podcasts. But the challenge here is, we still can't move this asset around. The idea here is it's just stuck statically in that image. Again, if we want to move it, if we want to modify it, we can't without agentically asking ChatGPT to move this. And there's something else that's happening, which might be kind of hard to tell, but I can see it with my eyes. It might be hard for you to see as we do the screen recording, but there's like a certain texture that happens. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There's a certain texture that I've noticed on smooth surfaces, whether it's skin or in this case, the microphone casing of metal. It begins to get these sort of like circles or sort of like noise effect. And it's becoming more and more obvious as we modify this image versus the first one. It's very slight on the first one. Like the first one's not that bad, But as we start to progress, we can definitely see it's almost like a ripple pattern in the on the surface of this. So this is very inside baseball, but I've seen this happen a lot with AI generated images. And I think where we're headed with AI, especially these platforms that are starting to monitor for AI generated content, I think they might start looking at AI generated cover art as well, or even chapter art as, video and folks start to adapt more podcast 2.0 chapter stuff, because that is also like a key indicator of how much you use AI in the totality of your production of your podcast. So again, I'm just theory crafting here, but I would say it's much easier for Apple, Spotify, YouTube to hit an image like your cover art and go, does this look like AI assisted artwork? Or does this look like unique user generated artwork? And that's going to be a fine line, but it could be something where Apple's algorithms, if they don't want to push AI content, could certainly look to this and go, nope, we don't want to use this. We can see the patterns inside of this image to say, this is not something that we would want to recommend. All right. So we've kind of built something here. It's kind of cool, not bad. But here's the last thing that I think a lot of folks might get stuck on. And this is like the craziest thing. It's the one fact of podcast submissions across all the major platforms. You need 1500 by 1500. You need a perfect square. This, I downloaded it. It's only 1245 by 1245. So this isn't going to actually even work. It won't get approved. Certainly not on the Apple side because of the low pixel count. It is a perfect square, which is, half the battle, but it won't get approved in the platform for podcast submission. So what does a user do? Well, there is one interesting thing that ChatGPT does, and you can upscale images. You can just say upscale this image. So let's do that. Let's say upscale this image to maximum 3000 by 3000. Now, again, we're running the risk of degrading the image again by doing that. Although I found that ChatGPT, when it's upscaling, retains details pretty good. I've often done this for YouTube thumbnails when I need to snag a YouTube thumbnail of myself. And sometimes I'm just in like the little talking head corner box, which is probably where I'm at right now as we record this video. Or if it's just like from a Riverside recording from a live stream that I did. ChatGPT does a good job of upscaling. So it does pretty good at that. We'll see how it does with this as soon as we get back. Okay, we're back. It did a pretty good job upscaling it. It is almost 9 megabytes, this file, after it upscaled to exactly 3000 by 3000 pixels. And I already downloaded it. So it did a good job on upscaling it. We do have a pretty big image. It's going to be a very big image to upload. So you're definitely going to want somebody to optimize that as best as possible. Let me just open this up. It didn't smooth out. It didn't smooth out any of the surfaces. Let me just go open a new tab. It's not going to let me open a new tab. But I still definitely see that sort of artifact effect on the microphone. Again, that's a real small issue. What I want to try to do now is, can we convert this into a Canva project? So Canva is an image editing app. It's one that I primarily use for a lot of my YouTube thumbnails and other podcast assets that I make. So let's see if we can convert this into Canva and see how good of a job it does with that, because that would allow us to move things around at least. Well, let's just see how we do. All right, so let's just say, can you convert this to a Canva project for us to edit the cover art text, Apple Podcast badge, and individual, let's just try individual microphone and headphone. Now, it's probably going to fail at that. Certainly at the microphone and the headphone thing, I would imagine it won't be able to do that. But I already have Canva connected to my ChatGPT. Let's see how well it does converting that to a project. Okay, so it wasn't able to convert the cast cover art that we made. It could have been because we made it too large when I did the upscale, which again, I said made almost 9 megabytes. So I think it failed. It says the direct conversion failed inside Canva's magic layers. It's going to create a fresh editable Canva cover instead. It's nothing like what we originally designed. So if you wanted to use the original design, this is where AI falls flat. It just, this connection, I simply can't just say replicate it and do it. Maybe if I kept asking it would finally get something close, but I would probably use up all of my token sessions in order to get it done. It made a few other ones that, don't look exactly like we wanted, but also it's not really giving us anything super usable, right? It just has this static background image that I can't do anything with. I can't move these assets around. I knew I wouldn't be able to, but it gave me this one section right here, which is text. So fine, I can edit this, but not super helpful. And then this one here is just like a whatever poster. It's like 2 images that represent noise, sound. And I have another podcast with some titles here, but this is really easy. Like this is just creating something in Canva, and now I can go in and edit it. So yes, ChatGPT can move this stuff over to Canva, but at what cost? And by cost, I mean, details, control, etc. Okay. So that's another experiment for another day, but you can kind of see those limitations. And maybe you've tried this before and you already know it, but if you haven't, hopefully we showed you something. So let me start a new chat here. And here's how I would leverage ChatGPT for AI-assisted cover art. So I might do something, generate a 3000 by 3000 image that has a soft white background with I'm just going to say floral border that looks like it was watercolor. I'm just like thinking as I'm typing, which is terrible. Which is like watercolor, but instead of flowers, it's microphones and podcast equipment. And now what I'm going to say is leave the center of the image with no design or text. You should only focus on the borders. Okay. So here in this case, what I would use AI Generate Assist with is creating some kind of maybe background, some kind of like background layout or border for your cover art, and then allowing you to use text from something like Canva and having a sort of like canvas open in the middle. You'll see as this image gets generated, fingers crossed that it comes out the right way, that we can now leverage this in another design, and it's a lot more scalable. You could then bring in your brand and logo if you already had one. If you had certain fonts that you used, you could bring that in a separate app, but maybe there's a head start here with design and graphic work that you might not be skilled at, but you just don't want to throw it all at AI. This is sort of like a 50-50 split, if you will. So let's wait for this to generate, and then we'll talk about it some more. Okay, so our image is made. It's interesting. It is podcast equipment for sure, in like this floral watercolor thing. And if that's what I was leaning into, it was just the words that came to my head, so I could create something unique. It's kind of unique. It looks kind of cool. But now, by directing it and giving it some focus, I have this center area where I can put my text in, and now I can build into this somewhat unique looking graphic. It's not something that you would standardly see across ChatGPT by just saying, hey, give me a piece of art that looks like a podcast cover art. So now if I say, can we open in Canva? This shouldn't be any kind of migration. We should just send this to Canva, and then I'll be able to edit and work in there. Okay, we've opened it up in Canva. Actually, interestingly enough, it turned these into individual images, which is actually really nice. I wasn't expecting it to do that, and that's really cool, because now you'd be able to take something like this and scale this into other assets. So now imagine if you wanted to build a YouTube banner or like a Twitter banner for your profiles or LinkedIn, you want to create different images and artwork. This actually worked out really well, this experiment. So now I could take certain pieces of this and bring these into those different assets as I promote my podcast. So thumbs up to that. That worked out fairly well. But now I could just come in here and just put in something like this. And drag that, and I'm just showing this as an example, but if this were the title text that I would use, I would just center this in the center there. And that could be the name of my podcast. And then I could put hosted by or something like that. So no, I'm not a designer, obviously, but I think most people who are leaning into AI are obviously not going to be designers. Though I do notice that this image should have been upscaled, of course, first, because this is also 1254 by 1254. Even though I said 3000 by 3000, what happened is this was probably 3000 by 3000, but the conversion to Canva went to 1254. So definitely something to pay attention to there, but this is a sample of bringing sort of like a different take on AI generated or AI assisted cover art into Canva to help you scale that podcast cover art, like I was mentioning at the top of the video. Okay, let's dive into looking at Claude AI. I'm going to run the same kind of test here. Claude has Claude Design. I think it might only be in the Pro plan, not in the free plan. You might want to check that. Depends on when you're watching this recording. But we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to say, let's create a 3000 by 3000 pixel image for my podcast cover art. The podcast is called A Podcast About Podcasting. And it's hosted by Amadeus. Generate 4 versions for me to choose from. So Claude Design is a little bit different. This is something that is, if you're familiar with Figma, if you've heard of this, this is a designers app for designing things. It's going to be much more involved. It's almost like if you were developing these images right in Canva. It's approaching AI assisted design in that sort of same context. But I put in my general prompt like you just saw me do. And now what Claude Design does is it helps build the context around images a lot better than just like vanilla ChatGPT. So it's going to ask me a couple of questions here just to help validate and find out a little bit more about our images. So it says, what vibe should the cover have? Bold, techie, warm and editorial, retro, minimal, playful. I'm going to go with playful because I'm just interested to see what that comes up with. Should it feature a host photo or an illustrative typographic? I'm going to say decide for me on that one. How prominent should Matt's name be? I'm going to say sub-credit line. Any modern direction? Let's see. I'm going to go explore a few options because I want to see a few more. It's asking me if I have a logo and a brand mark to include. So interesting. I wasn't ready for that question, but that's what I've been saying all along. Like you want to be able to make sure that you're following your own brand. Anything else I should know? I'm just going to say I'd like to see a few versions. And the image has to be minimum 1500 by 1500 pixels and maximum 3000 by 3000. Okay, so I'm going to click on continue. This is going to take a little while. Claude Design will take a little bit longer to complete than ChatGPT, but the good news is you don't have to wait for it through the magic of Hollywood editing. Okay, Claude Design is almost done with building out its examples for podcast cover art. Definitely more creative, but slightly different. Like it's not using any images. This is something that is much more controllable and scalable, as I mentioned before, and driven a lot by, of course, text, as I just said. So here are the 4 examples: electric, warm, techie art in mono or minimal. Kind of cool. We can zoom into these and take a look at each one, and each one has a different feeling, to a degree. It's all same structural layout for whatever reason. It's decided to put in, like this top sort of heading title, the title of the podcast itself, and then hosted by Matt Medeiros on the bottom of all of these, which is interesting. I would say that I like this sort of like techie art one the most, maybe, or maybe even this minimal one. I kind of like how it threw in like this sub headline here that says, yes, it's really that meta, a podcast about podcasting, which is funny. So really interesting that really interesting take that it had across all 4 of these designs. Now, it's still developing this stuff. It's still designing it in the back end, but each one is going to have its own individual file that we can edit and modify. And that's what makes Claude design a little bit different than, say, a ChatGPT. That didn't load there. So let me just go and take a look at the exports and just see, yeah, it's still rendering all of this stuff right now. So let's just go back. And then I can go in and look at these at more full-size scale there, or I can just download these right here. I can download as a PNG, I can download as an HTML, and I can actually do more with this. Like if I wanted to bring it into Claude Code or even back to ChatGPT and say, here's like the design aspects that I want to use. Kind of interesting. And you can take this a little bit further by going into editing mode and just clicking right into these elements of the cover art and modifying all the stuff that you see here, the fonts, the sizes, the colors, like all of this stuff is editable. And that's another thing that separates it from just doing it more statically, if that makes sense, in ChatGPT versus a Claude design. That's not what this video is all about. I just wanted to give you an overarching look at designing cover art with AI and some of the pitfalls here and some of the critical thinking you should do. Certainly, this is far and ahead better than ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is a lot faster. You'll be able to get out images a lot faster, but with the caution that I've already mentioned. This, you can go deeper. It's going to cost you a lot more on the Claude subscription, more than likely just because of the sheer amount of tokens that you'll use, but you can build out more branded assets. There's a whole concept of if we go back to the design systems, you can create your own design systems for your brand and then bring that into Claude Design and work with it that way. That's a much longer video on how to do stuff like that. But if you're somebody who might be a podcast producer, you're working with multiple clients, it could be a good thing to build that out here. Or the alternative is you pay a human that does that work for you instead of using AI altogether. I think at the end of the day, especially on the design side, that nothing beats human attention and human effort when making something unique in design. These systems are great. They're fascinating, number one. It's just interesting to see, like, to give something a task and have it give 4, 5, 10 iterations. So you're caught up in like the fascination of that. Like, oh, what can I get if I put this in? It's almost like a slot machine at a casino. It's much faster. So there's that. You look at that and you go, wow, like, it's not that I don't want to hire somebody. It's just I need this now kind of thing, which I totally get. And I think a lot of people get as well. So we're attracted to it because of that. There's like the systems of it. Like if I can stitch these systems together, I can build like this workflow, this automated workflow. That's cool and that's attractive. But in design, especially in branding, and I would say especially for cover art, very important to work with a human to build out that design as best as possible. And then maybe scale it with AI later if you want. But hopefully today's video showed you some of the challenges, some of the benefits, but some of the challenges of AI with generating cover art. As you can see, my tokens are still burning here. This has been running now, I want to say, for about 12 minutes on its own, just like building out these 4 iterations of this cover art here. So I'm going to wrap it here. This is already a very long video. If you found value in this, leave a comment below, thumbs up if you like the channel, subscribe to the newsletter, thepodcastsetup.com, where I share information like this about podcasting every month. We'll see you in the next one.